Hello viewers, this is Dhiren Mehta from the Global Perspectives. We are a new age crowdsourced reporting medium that brings alternate perspectives from opinion makers whose views are often not found convenient for the mainstream media to present. We are bringing this program amidst a very sad moment. Just 2 weeks back, 20 braveheart soldiers of Indian Army attained Virgati. They gave supreme sacrifice protecting our borders. We pay homage to them and we pray for well-being of their family. In our program today, we'll discuss what led to the clashes and what is the background of Indo-China border tension. And we'll also discuss what exactly happened on the night of 15th and 16th June that led to such a clashes resulting into so much of casualty on both sides. We'll also discuss in the second segment, what is China's bigger game plan? What is it trying to achieve both regionally in its neighborhood and also globally? To discuss this, we have in our panel Akshay. Akshay is a defense analyst with decades of experience in that field. We have David Vance. David is founder of Alt News Media. He has strong views on many of the topics that very often is found controversial. David doesn't mince his words and he airs his views without being politically correct, and that's why sometimes his views are not found very convenient for mainstream media. We also have Francios Gautier in our program. Francois is a journalist with 40 years of experience. He is a chief editor of a leading French magazine. Francois has been covering Southeast Asia, including Indo-China relationship, Indo-Pakistan relationship, dynamics within the Southeast Asia. He has very extensively covered Tibet as well. He has interviewed Dalai Lama several times, and he has written extensively about Dalai Lama and the strategic importance of Tibet. Francois is also a historian. So welcome to the panel, and we'll start with our program with opening statement by each of the panelists and then get into the two segments. Thank you so much. Welcome viewers. We'll start with opening statement from all our panelists first, and then we'll get into two segments. So starting in alphabetical order, Akshay ji, would you like to share your perspective?
Sure. How much time do I have?
Opening statement typically about 2 to 3 minutes.
Sure. So I think it's important to look at the strategic picture as well as the operational picture and the tactical picture. And basically what is happening here is that China is very close to the 2049 deadline they had set for themselves when they were created as People's Republic of China in 1949. They set a deadline for themselves to become the global hegemon as part of their long-standing Middle Kingdom strategy. So all that you're seeing now is nothing but a culmination of decades of preparation, decades of modernization of agriculture, industry, technology, and military. This started in Mao's time. And this is basically the end game to implement all of these strategies that they've been looking at for over a decade, for over 4 decades. And I think today I look forward to telling you a little bit about that and also telling you the situation on ground and actually showing how they might actually lose everything by going this route.
Thank you. And David, would you like to go next?
Yeah, well, I would just like to agree with what's just been said. I mean, this is all about China's 1949 to 2049 strategy. It's very clear, very obvious what's been happening. I think it might interest some viewers to understand how, for example, this has been projected in a lot of the Western media. And in the Western media, the conflict has been very much about, China's given India a bloody nose. That's how our totally unbiased and completely neutral British media have portrayed it, for example. And that's why it's really important for viewers to share this as widely as possible, because what we need is more of this independent-minded people providing analysis in depth, which provides people with greater truths. That's fundamentally what this platform is about. And one last thing before I sort of finish. This past week has seen one of the most powerful advocates for India removed from Twitter and social media. And I refer to my friend Katie Hopkins, who has consistently spoken up in favor of India, against China, against the tyrannies. She was taken down this week. So the battle is a big battle that we face. And the best way to fight it is the way we're doing it here, with using data, intelligence, and people standing together.
Thanks. And Francois, would you please go ahead?
Yeah, a war between China and India, which is very possible, and I have myself predicted that the next war would not be between Pakistan and India, the two enemies, but between China and the war between them, which is very possible now, would have very important consequences for the world. I don't think the Western world realizes that. They have a tendency to look at it from a distance. As David said, to think that China gave India a bloody nose, but the world is going to get involved. First, there are two nuclear powers, so this is not a joke. I mean, and I don't think China is afraid of consequences of a nuclear war. And secondly, the West is going to be drawn into it. The US is going to be drawn into it naturally. The US is going to support India. So we can see a worldwide war, even if it is limited. It's going to be a very serious. So I think the world needs to take serious interest in what's happening and know the facts, because they don't know the facts. The problem that even Mr. Trump doesn't know the fact properly. So we need to teach them the facts, particularly in the United States and England, which are very important powers. France, not so much, but still they are as ignorant as America. So we need to state the facts. What is at stake? What is at stake? Very important.
Thank you so much. So welcome to segment 1, viewers. So Francois, since you have been based out of India and covering India, China for last 30 plus years, if you see there has been going, dispute between China and India at several points, including in Kashmir, including in Ladakh, including the part that is illegally occupied by Pakistan, in Arunachal Pradesh, in Assam. So for our viewers' benefit, would you provide a little background on the dispute, the border dispute between China and India?
Right. So actually, one has to go back in history, to, I would say, in the beginning of the 20th century, because you had the first democratic leader of China, Sun Yat-sen, and he, through his wife mainly, was a very beautiful woman, became friendly with Nehru. Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, was still, a leader, an independent leader. So they became very friendly, and Nehru felt, that this was China and India. You know the story. Were natural brothers, natural sisters, and that it was very important in his vision of a socialist Asia that they should get together. So even when Sun Yat-sen abdicated and later he died, all the followers, Nehru kept a very, very close relationship with them. Very, very close relationship. There was a conference in Belgium, I think, in I don't remember the date, maybe in the early 30s, about, imperialism. And again, Nehru was there, he was one of the leaders, and the Chinese were there. So he felt that it was very important that at the cost of surrendering any idea of any Indian border, at the cost of Tibet, which always that the British considered Tibet as a natural buffer between China and India. The British were very right. I don't know what David thinks about it, but they always considered that Tibet was the important buffer between their empire, which was then their empire, and China. And Nehru was absolutely against it. And in 1927, at this conference in Brussels, it was called the International Congress Against Colonial Oppression and Imperialism. And Nehru was the leader, and he again reiterated his belief that India and China, had to be the leaders of an Asia, socialist Asia. And he even signed a joint declaration with the Chinese. So one has to go back and to understand that, even in 1951, the US had offered India, a position in the Security Council. They didn't want China to become part of the Security Council. So Nehru's sister, I think her name was, forgot her name.
Kamala.
Yeah. Nehru's sister sent a secret letter to Nehru. She was then the UN Indian ambassador in the UN, and she told Nehru, look, they have proposed that we part of the Security Council and not China. And of course, Nehru refused. This is one of his major blunders that he refused. And today, China is the main obstacle to India being part of the Security Council, which would be very important for India. So Nehru compromised, on and on again, even after he became Prime Minister of India in 1947. And Sardar Patel, who was, one of his ministers, told him, look, they're taking Tibet, they're going to take Tibet, they're going to claim part of China. So, the mentality that Nehru created, that India and China need to be friends at the cost of India compromising everything, Tibet and its borders and losing a war, it's still there today. It is there in the bureaucracy of India, in the higher bureaucrats, those who are in the Ministry of External Affairs and actually shape India's policy as regard, China and everywhere in the world. They have still the same fear of China also. I mean, I'm not as optimistic as you guys. I do think that, India is a wonderful country. It's a democracy. It's a living spirituality. But technology-wise, military-wise, in terms of ruthlessness, India is so far behind China. I'm not optimistic about the war because, there has to be some divine grace, which has always been there on India. But a war between China and India, I mean, China is way ahead of India. It's created airstrips, it's bringing a railway line, close to the Arunachal border, They're so far away. India is lagging behind because of this Nehruvian policy. So, if you look in the past, you can understand the present. This is what a good journalist does, And if you look at the past, India's attitude toward China of compromising, of fear of China also,
Great.
And it's reflected today. I mean, I'm a fan of Mr. Modi, but I don't think he's taken heads on the Chinese, unless he's hiding his game very well, but I don't think he's taken heads on the Chinese threat. I don't think he's taking the Chinese threat seriously. But I am, because China is a ruthless enemy. It's a ruthless enemy, and it's an enemy of the world. It's not only of India. It wants to conquer the world. I mean, Sri Aurobindo, the great Indian sage and philosopher, warned about China in 1949 that there is a threat there. There's a menace on the world. We need to be aware of that. And I think the world has forgotten. So we need to remind the world of the threat that is China, not only to India but to the world.
Thanks, Francois. And you mentioned that India is behind, China in many aspects, technology. Also, you mentioned military. Obviously, on ruthlessness, India is far behind China. I definitely agree. China is far ahead on ruthlessness, but whether India wants to become that ruthless is a different thing. So, Akshay ji is our defense expert here on the panel. So, let's hear from Akshay ji on those aspects. But before we get into the military balance between India and China, let's understand from Akshay ji as to, if you look at it, last 4 decades, there hasn't been any casualty between India and China, on India's side at least, neither on China. There was no single bullet fired in 40 years. Even this time, there was no bullet fired, but there was a very bad fight, skirmishes that resulted into so many casualties. So, if you look at it, after such a 40 years, if there is such a big fight that happened that led to, Virgati or supreme sacrifice of 20 Indian soldiers, including the commanding officer, Santosh Babu, as we discussed. What has gone so different this time? Is there something changed significantly that has led to such a big change on the ground?
Yes, thank you. I'll tell you what's changed, and it is a very, very significant change. But I just want to take literally 30 seconds or a minute to just absolutely assure this panel and everybody else who's watching this on two things. One, what happened on the night of 15-16 June on the Galwan Valley was an absolute disaster for China. Not only did they get a bloody nose, they basically had their head smashed in. So I have no idea why some people in the West are, and I had no clue that people were saying that India has been given a bloody nose. I mean, Chinese are terrified, and I'll talk about all of that. But any professional military analyst anywhere in the world, or any professional military and satellite people who look at satellite images, OSINT, are absolutely unanimous in this, that China was smashed that day, number one. Number two, as far as the military balance between India and China is concerned, I want to assure Francois that, with all due respect, he's completely wrong. The military balance is in favor of India. In fact, there's a very interesting tweet that came onto Twitter a few days ago, and I'll talk about it in great depth. But under no circumstances on this planet is India going to lose a war with China. It is not going to happen. The military balance between India and China is, if this is China, India's little here. I have no idea why people think it's like this. No, it's like this. And I will show you why that's the case. On ruthlessness, I do agree with Francois. All right, so going back to what happened and why this was different. As I said in my opening statement, in 1949, China planned out that in 100 years, there would be a global hegemon. As part of that, what they implemented was, starting in Deng Xiaoping's time, the 4 great modernizations. And these modernizations are modernization of agriculture, modernization of industry, modernization of technology, and modernization of military, in that order. Within the modernization of the military, they wanted to modernize the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. Number 2, People's Liberation Army Air Force. And number 3, People's Liberation Army Navy. The Navy was the last. At the beginning of the 21st century, around 2000, they realized that the military gap, especially in the maritime domain, between India and China is so much in India's favor that they have absolutely no hope of implementing their 2049 strategy if it comes to war. Therefore, what they did was in 2000, they implemented the strategy of the 3 warfares. You may have heard of it. It's very, very widely known in the industry. So the 3 warfares are psychological warfare, information warfare, and legal warfare. So if you see in the spectrum of warfare, you have kinetic warfare, which is action. You saw what happened on 15-16 June. That is kinetic. When air forces meet and fight, that is kinetic. But when you get all kinds of complete lies put in the media, that is not kinetic. That is information warfare. So in the spectrum of warfare, they knew very well that on the kinetic side, especially in the maritime domain, they are badly outclassed as far as India is concerned. So they implement, and the rest of the world as well, especially the US. So they implemented the strategy of the 3 warfares. And what has happened now is that now that they're coming very close to 2049, they have to start changing things on ground. So one of the most important things that they have to do is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with topography, but if you see, India is like this, Jammu and Kashmir is like this. Here you've got the Siachen Glacier, and here you've got the part which is the Pakistan occupied Ladakh, which is basically Gilgit-Baltistan. What China basically wants to do is, it wants to help Pakistan take over the Siachen Glacier and wants itself to take over the Siachen Glacier, and then link up via the Karakoram Highway down into Pakistan through the Karakoram Highway and reach Gwadar, which will give them a port in the Arabian Sea. So that is their main I would say, geopolitical objective as far as this is concerned. They absolutely want to own Askai chain and push India back from that so that they can link up and go down. Number one. The second thing that they want to do is, they want to tell the rest of the world that if we can push back such a big, such a strong military as in India, and in terms of military balance, India is rated between third and fourth in the world. There are various studies that are done. Depending on who you look at it, it's basically comprehensive military powers, basically third or fourth in the world. So they want to send a message out to India, or out of the rest of the world, and to their own people, that they can push India back. And therefore, if they can do that to India, then Vietnam, what choice do you have? Or what chance do you have? Sorry. Thailand, what chance do you have? And so on and so forth. Japan, what chance do you have? Remember, in 1979, Vietnam smashed China. Vietnam absolutely smashed China. So given all of that, let's come to what's happened now. Basically, what's happened now is that there was always a bit of a border dispute. And the reason was that there were, historically, the perception, the Indian claim line was here. The Chinese claim line was here. In the middle was what is called the line of actual control. That's where, during the 1962 war, where the forces disengaged. And it was decided that wherever the forces are, they will stay there. And that is where the actual control is, the line of actual control. You actually control that area, and we will not get kinetic beyond that area. They have constantly widened that area of line of actual control. It's called a salami slicing technique. You just go a little bit more into the area. But what they've done this time is, they wanted to shock India, taking COVID-19 as the advantage. So let me talk a little bit about that. January 2, 2020, the entire Chinese military went into lockdown. They were locked down completely. 2nd of Jan this year. Roughly on the same day, their domestic transportation networks went into lockdown. So you lock down your military, and then you ensure that your domestic transportation sector is locked down so that there is no transmission. But at the same time, international travel was fully open and encouraged. Most people know this. But what most people don't know is that between the 15th of December and middle of February, China bought significant quantities of PPE and ventilators. Then what they did was, in April, they do exercises in the Tibetan area. Typically, it is done at brigade level strength. The brigade is roughly 5,000 men. This time they did it with 2 divisions. So almost 5 or 6 times more. And when they were exercising, one of their divisions, the 6th Mechanized Division, broke off. Its constituent brigades, there are 3 brigades in each division, roughly, more or less. Its constituent brigades broke off and made a mad dash along the G29 into 3 areas. One is the area above the Galwan River. The second is the area in the depths of the Pangong Tso, and the third area is reserves for this. And the idea really was that in 4 or 5 areas, you would aggressively go and try to change the status quo. And that is what happened in Galwan. They tried to change the status quo. That is what happened in places like Gogra, in places like Hot Springs. They tried to change the status quo simultaneously. Never before have we seen such a situation. Earlier, what's happened is that individual patrols are going, their patrols are coming, you meet up, sometimes there is an engagement, scuffles, and you disengage. This time you had 3 armored brigades, or 3 mechanized brigades, I would say, not armored brigades, but three mechanized brigades at widely different areas, broke off, made a mad dash, and tried to come into Galwan. As far as Galwan was concerned, Galwan has never been a disputed area. The LAC runs So the way the Galwan River is, the river comes down from China, and it meets the Shiok River as it goes up from Demchok up to Dawlat Bay Goldi, roughly. So it's going south to north, and this river is basically coming east to west, the Galwan River. Where the Galwan River meets the Shiok, a little ahead of that, about a kilometer or so, is something called PP14, Patrolling Point 14, and the LAC is roughly about, sorry?
No, I was talking about the point 14, and maybe we can talk about a little bit the 8 fingers.
Yes, we will. But let me just talk about Galwan, and I'll just tell you about that. So the LAC lies about 5 kilometers upstream on the Galwan River from the confluence of the Shiok and the Galwan. The Galwan River Valley itself is about 80 kilometers, out of which 5 or 6 kilometers is within is in India's control, and the balance is big. But even though that valley mostly is in Chinese control, except for 5 kilometers, they've never really patrolled that area too much. It's a narrow valley; it's difficult to patrol. But this time, what they did was, as I told you, after the exercises in Tibet, they broke off 6 armored division, 6 mechanized div, and one of the brigades of 6 mechanized div came to the rear areas of this, and then they tried to push down. They also created a little dam there to dam the water flowing down. That is a very, very significant thing, because China is an upper riparian strait. All the main glaciers that feed the main Indian rivers are in Tibet, more or less. And what they did was, I think they tested to see if we can actually dam it. And what happened in Galwan is basically very, very significant, because India actually removed that dam. And ultimately, and I'll talk about the Galwan action in more detail, but just to bring this question to a conclusion, after China had intruded in 4 different areas, India did what is called mirror deployment. So if they deployed 100 people, we deployed 100. In the depths, if they had a mechanized brigade, we got in a mechanized brigade as well. So it was equal mirror to mirror deployment. This shocked them. We did it very, very fast, and despite their attempts to break away from their training and make a mad dash, it didn't really help. So they got a shock. And then discussions between lieutenant generals happened on the 6th of June. And in that meeting, it was decided that both parties will push back and come to status quo ante on all sides except the finger area on the north bank of the Pengzong Lake. However, so it was decided that on Galwan they will go back. They had come down to PP 14, Patrolling Point 14. They built a structure. They also built a dam, which is not in the public domain. But there is satellite imagery which shows that. And they said we will move back. Then what happened was, around the 13th or the 14th night, it was realized that they had gone back and come back again. So they agreed that they would go back. Both parties pulled back, and these guys just came back again. And the most interesting part is that the soldiers who came back were not the soldiers who went back. So 16 Battalion of the Bihar Regiment, which was responsible for this area, of which Colonel Santosh Babu was the CO, that battalion has been there in that area for 2 years. So they know who they talk to on the other side. Colonel Santosh Babu was a member of the negotiating team which negotiated the move back. So when he heard that this has happened, in good faith, along with a party of 30 soldiers, went up to a very, very steep climb onto Patrolling Point 14 to see what had happened and why these guys have come back again. And they were surprised to see that these people were completely different. And the moment they reached that area, they were ambushed. So a big ambush happened, and then the whole fight started. That's the big picture.
Thank you so much. And can you also little bit tell us why? So there was agreement between India and China to not use firearms, right, at the border, and yet so much of casualty, so much of brutality. Can you describe a little bit what happened?
Okay, sure. So in 1967, what had happened was that at Nathula, which is way east from where we are in Ladakh, on the eastern end of India, in Sikkim, there was a confrontation between Indian and Chinese troops. weapons were used. Again, Chinese attacked Indians first, killed about 80, but in the retaliatory action, India killed about 450. Okay, so after that, China got a bit of a shock again. And then in 1993, it was decided that it was called the Peace and Tranquility Agreement. This was China's idea. They said that we can't really take on the Indian army. It's quite difficult to do. So let's agree that when we are patrolling on the LAC, nobody will use weapons, firearms, within 2 kilometers of the LAC. So from 1993 onwards, and the next agreement was signed in 1996, and then in 2005, there was a series of agreements. And it was decided that nobody would use weapons. So what typically happens is that in some sectors, Indian troops would go without weapons. And in some sectors, they would go with firearms, but the magazine on which the bullets are is not mated to the rifle. The magazine would be in the pouch. So you would put your rifle down, put the across your shoulder, the barrel is pointing down, and the magazine is on your chest, in your pouch, sorry. What China did this time was that right from early May in Pangong Tso area and all of that, they started getting weapons like clubs with nails in them, baseball bats with barbed wire around them, iron rods, and so on and so forth, thinking that they can push the Indian troops back while not breaking the agreement technically, right? But they forgot the Indian infantryman, one of the best in the world. So a lot of this stuff happened. However, so and so this is not the first time it happened, but I think the mistake India made was, or what we did not realize is, we went by the rule of the law. So the agreement says that you will not carry firearms and you will not use firearms, therefore you will not use. They don't really care about those agreements. So when Colonel Babu realized that they have come back, as per standard operating procedure and as per orders, he went across without weapons, without ammunition mated to the rifles, and not to open fire. And when we went there with this party of 30, the Chinese started throwing boulders, and Colonel Babu was grievously injured. Now the CO, the commanding officer, is a father figure. He is like like a deva, like Bhagwan. When the troops saw that Colonel Babu, their commanding officer, was injured and later killed, they led a ferocious hand-to-hand charge without weapons against the Chinese. They snatched the weapons from them, they snatched their clubs and all of that, and just hammered them. Chinese brought in more reinforcements. Indians brought in more reinforcements. The second part of the reinforcements got bayonets fixed. So they took out their bayonets and fixed them. The Ghatat platoon of the 3rd Battalion of the Punjab Regiment came. A small contingent from 3 medium regiments. So medium regiment is the artillery regiment. They came from their gun positions. A small contingent from 98 Field Regiment, which is also an artillery regiment, but with smaller caliber guns. They came with a small contingent. And in the course of that action, of a quick question, about 5-6 hours, roughly about at least 55 Chinese were killed, and possibly another 100. And what happened that night, one of the things that happened that night was what is called a dhava charge, bayonet charge. And you just have to see an Indian Army dhava charge to know what it is. You fix the bayonet, and then you just go and you just put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out. Very few people can stand up against an Indian Army bayonet charge, right? And they were shocked. We have heard reports from troops saying that the Chinese were crying like crybabies. Okay, and then what happened was Indian.
And this was from the intercept that all heard.
Yeah, no. This was this not from intercept, from our soldiers who were wounded. When you go and ask them, listen, what happened? They said that, sir, the Chinese were crying like crybabies. Initially they tried to ambush us. There were about 200 of them sitting on the right-hand side of the slope on the top. When 30 people of Colonel Babu went there, these 300 people sitting there threw boulders at them and attacked them. But once our troops snatched their weapons from them and hit them back, and then more troops came in and did the bayonet charge, they started crying. This is it. Their necks were snapped off. lots of Chinese troops, necks were smashed off, heads was scarred. So a massive fight happened and China was smashed. But what is most interesting from the attack is that many Indian troops jumped into the water, into the Galwan River. Some came from the side up and broke that dam. That dam is, yeah, it was broken. It was broken. There is satellite imagery that shows it. So if you look at satellite imagery from I think pre-15 June, you see that where the Galwan is flowing with heavy water, with massive water, and from one point it is completely dry. And satellite imagery shows that there is no moisture downstream from that point. So obviously there is something there. And the images that we have seen in the open source, they are not that high resolution that you can see what is down there. But obviously there is a restriction there. So all of that was broken, not completely, it was partially broken. But the troops jumped in. And this was at 16,000 feet. 16,000 feet where breathing is extremely difficult. The water is probably minus 20 degrees. They jumped in, many died of hypothermia. Out of this 20 that were killed, about 5, 6, probably more just died from hypothermia, not from Chinese action, because they jumped in to break that dam, and that dam was finally broken. So this was a tactical action that has had massive strategic implications, and it's done two things. One, it has shocked China, but only those who didn't know, only those people who had believed the lies about the Chinese army have been shocked. Professions across the world are not shocked. You know, they expected something like, so they were shocked. Number two, this dam was broken and a precedence was set that if you do something serious, if you do something like this, we will hit you back. But the interesting thing is, this is not the only place where we hit them. There's a place called Gogra. Nobody's talking about Gogra. There's only a couple of people who are talking about it. The Chinese did a similar thing there. They intruded into the Indian area, and actually the Indian area is huge, and they're sitting on a large part of Indian area from historical periods. But even from the LAC, they intruded into the Indian area. They built a little structure there. It was a corrugated iron roof, and I think they built it on the 8th of May. We've got satellite imagery on the 8th of May that was built. But if you look at it on the 26th of May, there is nothing there, but there is an Indian encampment there which can support 500 people. Again, they have been smashed there and they've been sent back. I don't believe that was a kinetic action. I think they were just pushed back. So what has basically happened is, big picture, the Chinese came in across 4 areas with a very clear intention to push, to take over territory. They were stopped in the Galwan Valley. The dam was broken and about 50 to 150 casualties were given. And you might ask me, how do you know there were so many casualties? We've counted about 40 helicopter sorties just on the night, just on 16th to take them back. Now, if each helicopter can just take 2 stretchers, that's 120 stretchers minimum. As late as 19th of June, we've counted ambulances there in that area, deep inside their territory. So they lost a lot of troops. They've been stunned, and they've been pushed back in a lot of areas. And the good thing is that an order has gone down now from the top authorities that the SOP of not using firearms no longer exists on ground. It still exists on paper, but we will not follow it on ground any longer. All commanders will take actions consistent with the safety of their command and in consonance with their operational objectives, which is to ensure that the LAC's sanctity is maintained.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are running a little short of time, so we'll move forward quickly. So David, coming back to you, if you look at it in last 3 years, last 3 months particularly, though going back even last few years, but last 3 months particularly, China has become extremely belligerent, especially after the release of COVID. If you look at what they are doing in Hong Kong, we briefly talked about in the introfragment, etc. What they are doing in Taiwan, what they are doing with India, obviously, and also in the globally in the media, etc. Is it something what they are doing, this so much of aggression in just last 3 months that has increased suddenly while they were pushing the envelopes constantly, but sudden change in the gear? Is it to divert attention of their own people from the setback that they are seeing economically, employment down, economy down from the Chinese virus, Wuhan virus, coronavirus, whatever term that you want to use?
Well, the short answer is yes. But can I just go back to a couple of things actually as well, if I may? First of all, I really wanted to thank what we've just heard as a masterful, detailed analysis of what actually happened. And, you know, we did talk about the fact that the Chinese do operate multifaceted warfare, information being part of it. So, you know, when we sort of talk about how can it be that the West present something which was the Chinese being given a really good beating, how can that be presented as a victory for the Chinese? I'll tell you why, because they're really good at propaganda. That's why. And they also can manipulate the European media and the British media in particular, I think, not least because they have got, you know, financial interests, financial shareholding. So it does speak to what we've been talking about. China plays a multifaceted warfare game. And it is, I mean, both the previous speakers have tackled this, the way they do it. It's very clever. You've got to take your hat off to them at one level, but at another level not, because they're, as I've frequently stated, they are a global predator. They are a global menace. It just so happens that India, because it's up against them, is right in the lion's den. And that's why I also think that it's really good for programs like this to go out so people really do get the facts of what actually did happen. In terms of back in earlier this month, because assuredly, if they've been listening to Western media, they ain't got any of those facts. Now, another fact that they haven't got is, back to what you said, Dhiren, that the Chinese have never missed an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis. In this case, one that they created. So the Wuhan flu, or whatever we want to call it, you know, the global pandemic, which started in China, which has devastated the globe, is very helpful at one level to the Chinese, because it gives them the cover to do lots of stuff. What we've just heard in terms of what's happened, concerning India, is just one example of that. China is a bully. That's we're saying that when they met the Indian troops, they ran away crying like babies. That's what bullies do. The minute you confront the bully, the bully legs it. The bully doesn't stand there and fight back. Bullies don't do that. China, therefore, this is one of my arguments. China needs to be confronted at every level, in every sphere, because, again, they do have their 2049 strategy. They want to be the global hegemony by 2049. And actually, folks, it's not nice to say this, but it's truthful. They're not far away from achieving that, to my regret, because they've inveigled their way into across the world using commerce, using, in this case, a bioweapon, all kinds of methods they've used to take control of regions, if not continents. I mean, look at Africa. Basically, Africa is the copyright China. They essentially have very cleverly bought it in such a way that it hasn't cost them anything, but has cost those foolish African nations that embrace China everything, as they will find out eventually, and as some are. So Dhiren, to go back to your question, the Chinese have absolutely taken advantage of the past 4 or 5 months to further advance the 2049 strategy. And that's something which I hope is understood in the White House. It certainly needs to be, because going back to what Francois said, that India should not have to stand alone, even if it can, to a degree, stand alone. It shouldn't. We should all stand with India. That means, the West, the European Union, the UK, the US. We all need to understand that this is a global predator that we face. And, either China wins or we do. It's a binary choice. You're not going to get a nice comfortable solution. There won't be, not when you're dealing with communists who wiped out millions of people in the last century and given half the chance to do the same again if it delivered their objectives. So that's why, as I say, I totally endorse what India has done, and it's been great to get the deeper analysis of it, which I think is fantastic. But I also think it has to be understood that, okay, this is one front, but China is going to, well, we'll maybe talk about this, have many other fronts which they're going to open up as well. And that's why we have to recognize the nature of the enemy that we face. And, you know, they are our enemy. This is not a time for soft words. You know, we shouldn't want to be friends with the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party want to take global supremacy, economic supremacy, cultural supremacy. And when we face a menace like that, we only can defeat it if we unite.
Thank you. And in fact, just before 14, 15, 16, when these clashes happened, we had our program, Francois, David, you were part of that, on the alliances and the need for strengthening alliances, especially recognizing the new threat of China. And what you mentioned, David, is that we have to come together. I think, you know, we'll have maybe a detailed discussion on that in our follow-up program sometimes as to what should the shape of those new alliances look like, though we did cover briefly in that program. Yeah. But coming back to you, Francois, so from your perspective, right, I would like to hear, since you are based out of India and, you know, you cover during the UPA era, the then Defense Minister, A.K. Anthony, had given a very, very surprising statement in Parliament, so it cannot be wrong. It was given in Parliament that the policy that India had adopted, while China especially, is to not develop border. So India's view was that to keep the border safe is to not develop border, have it undeveloped so there won't be any interest from enemies like China to invade into border. It was very stupid, but that was the policy, and that was talked by A.K. Anthony, who was the defense minister. And in Parliament, he had said that last 5 years, especially 6 years, but 5 years especially, there has been significant development on the border at various places, including Arunachal Pradesh, including the, you know, Ladakh and other region. Do you think that is rattling China?
Definitely, Mr. Anthony was not a very brilliant, defense minister. I think even within his own party, nobody took him very seriously. But he only followed what Mr. Nehru, the Congress, after all, is Mr. Nehru's grandchild, and Mahatma Gandhi, because one should not forget that the absolute non-violence that the Mahatma Gandhi preached, though it borrows from beautiful concept, the ahimsa, both the Buddhist and the Hindu ahimsa, the non-violence, the inner non-violence, has hampered India. What hampers India even today is that, the Nehru's inheritance, Mr. Nehru was warned, I think there's a story that the Prime Minister of Burma just before the 62 war between China and India, sent him a warning that, the China is preparing for war with you. And it is recorded that Nehru got, completely hysterical, and he shouted, "He must be crazy, he must be crazy." That he went to provoke China. So Nehru and his defense minister, Mr. Menon, they didn't even want to prepare the soldiers, to face China. So Krishna Menon is criminal. He should be judged in India. But still, I would like to come back to this. Why is not China, even today? I'm a great fan of Mr. Modi, and I think you're right. Since 2014, there's been a change. The army has been propped up. There's more defense of the border, but still, Mr. Modi twice, hosted, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, and in a grand manner and in a loving manner, again in a manner of brotherhood, of love, once in Ahmedabad, really treated him like royalty. And then recently in Mahabalipuram,
in Tamil Nadu.
I know Mahabalipuram, and really out of a good heart, said, yes, we should have peace. Yes, we are two great nations. Yes, war is no good for us. Let us, and the Chinese president stabbed him in the back. I think Mr. Modi, looking at his photos nowadays, he's not recovered from that. He's been shocked. He's been hurt. Because it really went out of his heart. Like Nehru. It's the same.
Yes.
It's the same. So it is not only Hindi, Chini, bye-bye. It's not only, the socialistic vision of two brothers together. It's also because of so many factors. Mahatma Gandhi and Buddhism, Buddhism is what Buddha preached. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going a little astray. What Buddha preached was a universal spirituality, but what his disciples later did out of it, is a religion, is a creed, So the non-violence of Buddhism, there's Ashoka, the famous Ashoka, whom Nehru loved very much, supposed to have converted to Buddhism because of war, but it's not true actually, if you read Indian history properly, and then Mahatma Gandhi, these are tying India's hands, these are tying India's hands, and so even today, even though since 2014, India cannot be taken for granted by the Chinese, like Akshay said very rightly in the confrontation in Galwan, I still believe that India's hands are tied, because of this, good, it's a good volition, it's a good volition, but it doesn't work in this world today, and it doesn't work against the Chinese, because the Chinese are, they are very intelligent, very ruthless, I think Mr. Modi again met the Chinese president, near Wuhan somewhere, and again Modi said, oh, it's great to meet her, and two great nations, and I feel in my heart, and the Chinese guy actually was very, very sober. He said, yeah, it's okay, now is the spring, So India is no match for China, whether it's Mr. Antonio, whether it's Mr. Modi, unless the mindset changes, And for that, it needs the support of the West. India needs the support, because it's not only in the Himalayas, it's also on the seas,
South China Sea, yeah.
It's very important. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So with that, viewers, we will end our segment 1 and see you in second segment. Thank you so much. Welcome. We are back to our second segment on this India-China border conflict. In this second segment, we'll talk about, what is the bigger picture. So, David, coming back to you, what do you think is China's game plan, both within, with respect to Asia, but also globally? In Asia, territorial expansion is obviously what they are trying, but globally also. And we briefly talked about that in our first segment, about what Akshay ji said about, various kind of warfares, information, legal, etc. But what do you see the overall goal plan that China has?
Well, I mean, China spelled it out. There's no reason to have any doubt about this. China specifically in the next, 30 years, less than 30 years now, wants to be the global superpower. And to achieve that, it will do everything and anything so that it recovers from what it looks upon as a century of humiliation that preceded 1949. So we have this, if you like, this communist superpower, which has used capitalism and used technologies to develop a structure which, like a cancer, spreads across the world, and it has spread across the world, Dhiren. This is the difficulty we face with China. It's everywhere. It's in British universities. They're building a nuclear power plant in Britain. Can you imagine? Britain will be reliant on the Chinese for nuclear power. Now, what could possibly go wrong with that, I wonder? So this is the nature of the Chinese global strategy. It has bought its way into our academic institutions. Across the UK, we've got 27 Confucius institutions across the UK. 27. And I'm sure every one of those 27 institutions is happily feeding as much information back to Beijing as the Chinese Communist Party ever needs. And that's just Britain. Can you imagine what it's like in terms of Africa, where they've taken complete control? I mean, as I said in the previous part, they've essentially bought up big chunks of African nations, and they've used their own wealth to achieve that. That's why I feel that, and ultimately, the only barrier I see to, and it'll be interesting to see what my fellow guests think, but the only barrier that I see to ultimate Chinese victory is a Trump victory in November of this year, and at least having someone in the White House who is not sympathetic to the Chinese. Yes, Trump wanted to do, he wanted to do business deals with China and so on and so forth. But I think he recognizes the nature of the enemy. And therefore, having one major, well, the other major global superpower, which is the United States, which seeing in China in its true colors, it's the only bulwark we have, because the reality check is that, India can't stop China as a global superpower. The EU can't stop China as a global superpower. But if we can find ways to unite, we can push back. But I think it's late in the day. I don't want to be a pessimist, but you ever heard the expression, an optimist is, a pessimist is an optimist mugged by reality. Well, I think that if you look at the global scenario, you do see that China has made vast progress, and that the West has participated in actually slitting its own throat, because we sent lots of our manufacturing to China, so China gets wealthy and rich, making products for us. We become reliant in China, and that reliance is like a drug. It got greater and greater and greater. That has to stop. So it's pretty clear where China's going. That there's no doubt about that. They want to be the global superpower, a communist global superpower. All around the world, we've got lots of little Marxists all over the place who would be very happy about that. Those of us who value civilization, who value our own cultures and countries, have got to resist. And as I say, we do that together, not individually. So that's why India's fight is my fight, should be America's fight. And that's how we have to do these things. Otherwise, they will succeed. And, I'll say this, might be a bit controversial, but there you go. A lot of people, a lot of my Indian friends actually, have issues on the British Empire and the things that the British Empire did. And of course I accept, like, the British Empire was far from perfect, but it did some good as well. But let me say this, let me just share this thought with everybody. If you think the British Empire was a problem, just wait till you have a Chinese empire controlling you, dominating you, telling you what you can do. An empire that within its own people operates live organ harvesting, an empire that has no respect for human life. So, we all have to resist the Chinese empire. And that's why I'm very proud to stand with my Indian friends and anyone anywhere who recognize the enormous threat that we face.
Thank you so much. So, David, what you said, part of that, there is a far more sinister design. And maybe China is taking advantage of the free economy, the capitalist world, where the corporates are driven by profits and media is controlled by corporates. Academia has become profit center, and they are all controlled by China because everybody, so I think free economy sometimes, or capitalist, also has its own weaknesses in this matter to deal with socialist economy. But coming back to you, Akshay J, while David did talk about the Chinese game plan, etc., and how they are trying to achieve, how is China trying to achieve the same from military standpoint? As a military expert, would you share your perspective on that?
So I think it's important to note that let me just take a little poll. If I asked you whose army the Chinese army is, and also Navy and Air Force, what would you say? What would you, very quickly, just one word, what would you say, David?
Whose army?
Whose army is the Chinese army?
It's the Chinese Communist Party's army.
Francois?
Yeah.
Okay. So absolutely. What many people don't realize, and I think this is an enlightened panel, but if I'd ask the same question in a common panel, the answer would be, hey, it's China's army. No, it's not. It is the army of the Communist Party of China, and therefore, whatever the agenda of the communists, whatever the political agenda, the multi-decade, the multi-century agenda is, that will be accomplished. So how will they do it militarily? See, China, what China does, so what China doesn't tell anybody is that since 1979, after they were smashed by Vietnam, they have not really lost any troops on ground, but every time they've been in action, they've been hammered. Sudan, this is documented, and I can share this with the group later. In peacekeeping operations in Sudan, the Chinese army ran away from Sudanese guerrillas, and the Indian army had to save their Panma language backsides. It's happened many times. So the thing is that they don't want a kinetic war. That is my assessment. Now one can go wrong. Maybe everything that we see, all inputs that we're getting, they're all wrong. All our ground experience is wrong, and maybe they want a kinetic war. But my assessment is that at the moment they don't want a kinetic war. What they want is people to fear them, and especially smaller countries, and move down. One of the most important areas to tackle China is the seas, in the maritime domain. They are building their navy at a very fast pace. There is no navy in the history of humankind which is built up so strongly and so fast as the Chinese navy has been built up. And the other thing they're trying to do is their air force, I think, is roughly about 2,000 aircraft, out of which only about 750 are generation, fourth, fifth generation. They're trying to build up. But one very important thing they're trying to do, and I presume we're talking globally, is they are trying to win without firing a shot. And I think that is what the world has to be very conscious about. That, and I think Francois made this point very well, though I don't agree with Francois on the balance of power, balance of military power, I don't really agree with him, but the balance of strategic power, the mindset that is especially there in India, in the political bureaucratic leadership, I totally agree with Francois. And I think it's in the rest of the world. They're trying to win without firing a shot. And I think what the world has to do is to hold them wherever there is an area, get them into a kinetic conflict. Get them into a kinetic conflict. We've seen what happened on 1516 night. We have looked at Chinese social media reactions to them. On Weibo, it's just gone crazy. Despite all media control, millions of messages on Weibo saying that why have so many of our troops lost, and why are they not getting state funerals? The Indian army is giving state funerals to their soldiers. Why are you not doing it on our side? The more Chinese lose kinetically, it is crucial for China to lose kinetically, in my view, in different theaters. And it doesn't have to be a total war. If they try to take an island in the Sea of Japan, push them back. And once this starts happening, the narrative that they've created inside their country, that we are an invincible army, which they're not. Every time they've fought, they've lost. That will lead, in my opinion, if done properly, to the balkanization of China. And therefore, what is absolutely critical is that wherever China has lost, bring the issues of Sudan out. Let everybody know what happened when Chinese soldiers ran away. Every time China tries to take some territory, stop them, push them back, regardless of consequences. So I think that is.
So what you're suggesting is information war against China in terms of their losses, in terms of their weaknesses, as well as obviously the military, defense against China to be propped up.
Don't back off kinetically. Use every opportunity to take on China kinetically. I want to see what happens when hundreds of Chinese soldiers or naval or airmen or sailors are killed. What is the reaction to the single child families?
Okay.
Right. This is critical, and get the truth out. Lastly, one very quick point. David, you mentioned about nuclear power plants and all of that. I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm told that they've got hardware bugs. So the bugs, usually bugs on the software, they've actually got bugs in hardware that they use to do stuff. So
wow, so there could have been significant repercussion. You can't even upgrade the software because it's a hardwired. You just can't unless you get rid of the.
I think Francois wants to say something.
Yeah, I want to say something about, I don't think the Chinese, are ready to win this war without firing a bullet. There is a famous, quotation from Mao Zedong about the 62 war. It's there in the book of Jonathan Ward, who wrote China's Vision of Victory in 2019. Mao Zedong said, India needs to be taught a lesson. And he described the war itself as rational and beneficial and courteous. I don't know the word courteous, what he means by that. But I think that the Chinese are ready to go to war. I think they consider India as inferior. They consider the whole world as inferior, but India is even lower than the Westerner. I mean, Americans are inferior, but in the ladder of being inferior, India is much lower. Talking about racism today is racism is very much in the news. Chinese are huge racists. So I think they're ready to fight a war. I think they do believe that India, will be a walkover. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. So coming to, sorry, David, you want to say something?
No, it's just to Francois' point. I can't wait for the Black Lives Matters movement to start up in Beijing and see how they get on. That should be interesting, shouldn't it?
So Akshay, you mentioned that world has to really push back on China when they are trying to capture something kinetically, especially, and inflict some kind of casualties on their side to win this game of minds that China has built up, that we are invincible. So tell us, how has been Indian military response to the current aggression by China? We saw what happened in Doklam 3 years back, and recently, obviously, a couple of weeks back in Galwan Valley. How has been India's response militarily to China? Has India really pushed back? And how is it different from India's response in past? Because China-India, this border dispute has been going on for decades now. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. So let me tell you a little story, a very interesting story that nobody knows about. I told you about 1967, hammered them in 1967, but in 1982, a very interesting thing happened. Indian soldiers and Chinese soldiers used to operate without weapons because the government told them to. This was before the agreement was signed. And as the head of the 17th Mountain Division, a great legend took over, Lieutenant General Hanut Singh Ji. That time he was the Major General. He was an Armored Corps officer. And he didn't want to go there. He said, I'm an Armored Corps officer. I'm not going to take on a mountain division. I don't want to fight an infantry war. But he was given that. And when he saw his division, he saw that, the government orders were crazy, that soldiers would go without weapons. Chinese would come up with Chinese characters on a placard. Hey, this is our territory, go back, and Indians would come back. So he went to his division. He met every single brigade. He held darbars. And he gave a very simple order. He said, you will go out with weapons. Weapons will be cocked and ready. You will deploy tactically. If the Chinese come in, one company in the front, two in the back, whichever tactical things, and you will be the first one to fire a shot. If I find that any Indian casualties have happened and you have not fired the first shot, I will court-martial everybody. This was stunning.
This is not known at all.
No, nobody knows this. This is stunning. This is General Hanut Singh Ji, and he was, and this news spread around in an area which had the maximum violations by the Chinese for 1.5 years. When Major General Hanut Singh was GOC, silence, nothing happened. What's happening now is the Indian Army has been in the minds, in strategic level, a little defensive because they follow the rule on the ground. But what we've done is we've done mirror deployments. The Chinese have deployed the 6th Mountain Division, the 6th Mechanized Division, as I told you. We've also deployed. Which is very interesting. They're bringing another Mechanized Division, the 4th Mechanized Division. They're trying to bring that. So we are deploying more. What we've done is in the Leh area, we've got 1 division, 3 div. We've put in another division there, fully acclimatized mountain troops. We've moved up more tanks there. We already have an armored brigade there. I'm told that another armored brigade is moving up there. We moved up the Air Force, we moved up attack helicopters and all of that. So there is mirror deployment happening. On the eastern side, troops have moved on to forward positions. The Chinese are mobilizing a little bit, but the Indian Army and Air Force is also mobilizing. And what is not really talked about too much is that the Indian Navy is also, I'm told, doing their part. I think the Indian Navy's part, as anybody who follows the maritime domain knows, that it is to put pressure on the sea lines of communication. So the Indian Navy is ready. And what is happening now is that we've mirror deployed. Now there's a process of disengagement. So the armies are slowly disengaging. But what we're doing now is we are verifying every step of the disengagement. So they say that we have disengaged because now you can't trust them. Every step is being verified. I think this whole process, if it does not go kinetic, this whole process could take months. But Francois could well be right. They might want to go to war. It might just happen, but they are definitely deploying significant reserves in the back areas. As I said, they moved another division in. They moved another mechanized division in.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think what we are doing is we're doing mirror deployment and putting our deployments in place.
So what we would like to cover in our next program, Akshay Ji, specifically cover about the India-China military balance, the strategies to be used, what has been happening on the ground, what are the possibilities, etc. So we'll have a dedicated program.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll go over the entire military balance. We'll start with land forces. We'll explain the military balance in land forces. We'll explain the terrain. We'll show why China can't hope to win, even if they bring in a 2:1 ratio, 3:1 ratio, because this is mountainous areas. There are only a few places where you can come out. They're called mountain passes. We can dominate those passes. This is just military tactics. You go and talk to a British Army officer, you go and talk to an American Army officer in staff college, they'll tell you the same things. This is just military logic. If mountains are like this, there's only this area you come in. If you concentrate on that area and cover it, you can't come in. So they will have to deploy significant forces, 5-6 times what they have now. And they might, or they might do a preemptive massive rocket strike. In that scenario, things might get a little difficult. So we'll go over all of that.
Okay, thank you so much. So Francois, coming back to you, what do you see has been India's response to China aggression from a diplomatic and economic standpoint?
Okay, first from the economic point of view, there's been a huge movement in India, especially on social media, but also on part of the government, because they introduced certain laws to make it difficult for the Chinese to invest in India without some scrutiny. So there's been a huge outcry for boycott of China's goods. But practically, it's not possible because India is dependent. India exports so much to China. The trade imbalance, I don't know, is in dozens of billions of dollars. And also, what is sold in India is very often Chinese. For instance, mobile phones, out of 6 mobile phones which are sold, by Amazon and Flipkart and the big, retail giants in India, 5 are Chinese. All the laptops today are made in China. So every time you buy a laptop in India, it's been made in China, though it might not show on the laptop. So practically, and I think Mr. Modi knows it, it's not practical. It cannot happen, economic boycott of China, because India is too dependent on China. I think even some of the things, like Ganeshas, and dollars, and my wife works in a candle and incense factory. So most of the ingredients are imported from China because, of course, China, is very efficient. You order, it comes on time. The prices are reasonable. So India depends. So economically, I don't think it's feasible to boycott China. Now, diplomatically, I'm a great lover of India, and I always defended India. But what would rattle China most without firing a bullet, as Akshay said, would be, from the Indian side, would be, to support Tibet and the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is there in India. He's a friend of India. He's a wonderful guy. I've interviewed him, 7-8 times. He's a yogi in the sense, of a wise man. He's widely respected. He got a Nobel Peace Prize. He's respected all over the world. And this is the one name that the Chinese lose all kind of, balance. You say the Dalai Lama, they lose all kind of balance. So, but India is not using that weapon. I remember Mr. Advani, when he was the Vice Prime Minister of India, told me that, Dalai Lama, we don't know whether he's pro-Chinese or not. So there is a reluctance to upset the Chinese. But again, Tibet, is a buffer. The 3,500 kilometers of border, most of it is Tibet. If Tibet was still independent, India's problem will be, vulnerability to China would be much, much less, because most of the border is Tibetan. So why not speak like the Chinese do not recognize, Kashmir? They say that Kashmir is not part of India, They give separate visas to Kashmiris as well people from Arunachal Pradesh because they claim Arunachal Pradesh. So they give separate visa to them. They don't consider them Indians. Why not? Can't India say, Tibet is occupied by China? China occupied Tibet. And three words. China occupied Tibet. This would rattle the Chinese immensely. And again, Dalai Lama, is the one weapon that India has, and a rightful weapon in terms of, speak of dharma, speak of, rightfulness, speak of truth. You cannot be, you cannot have someone who is more, rightful and dharmic, and non-violent.
An international figure.
So for me, there is no diplomacy. There's no diplomatic response. There is none. There is none. There is silence. We are waiting for Mr. Modi to say something. At one point he said there's been no intrusion. All the satellite images show that there was an intrusion. Now they're showing that China is building up. So there has been intrusion. So we're waiting for Mr. Modi to say something. Forget about the Dalai Lama. So I'm disappointed. As a lover of India, as someone who's very suspicious of China, who's been saying for years and decades, that China is the enemy. Sorry, I'm very disappointed.
Can I make
Akshay, you wanted to say something.
Very quickly.
Go ahead, Akshay.
So, Francois, let me set your mind at rest on one issue. There was they tried to come in. They've been pushed back very significantly. As I said, in Gogra, their camp was destroyed. In Gogra, their camp was destroyed and they were pushed back. Galwan, you know what happened. Hot Springs will be pushed back. So I think militarily, it's okay. Where I do agree with you, where I absolutely do agree with you, is that when we look at the issue militarily, it is not only military; it is diplomatic as well. Though the Indian military is quite strong and quite good, we get hamstrung as a country. We definitely get hamstrung by a defensive mindset diplomatically. There is no question about it. There have been times when messages have come down to commanders on the ground. Not recently, but years ago, 10 years ago. Don't do this, don't go there. Even on the LOC against Pakistan during the UPA period, permission had to be taken. Permission had to be taken to use your battalion heavy weapons. I mean, forget using artillery. You could not use your mortars. If the enemy was using mortars against you, you had to take permission to use mortars. I mean, it's ridiculous. Speak to any military person anywhere in the world, they'll say this is ridiculous. So that aspect is there. And I think because Indian policy, both our procurement policy, our diplomatic policy is largely made by bureaucrats. We have a problem there. We have a mindset problem. And on that aspect, I do agree with Francois. And absolutely, Dalai Lama must be recognized. And why not Taiwan? Taiwan's recognized, but it started during the.
Why can't India recognize
Taiwan? No, Francois, but you're right, but
defending India, you're defending India all the time. You're saying, "Oh, Indian military is strong," but
Francois, you do not know.
They don't do the simple thing.
Listen, hold on. I'm telling you, you don't know the military issues. So I'm telling you facts. On the diplomatic issues, I'm saying you're right. Right, but you can't equate the two. They're different things. even diplomatically, two Indian MPs attended the recent inauguration of the Taiwanese government. But
virtually.
I mean,
very low level diplomats. I'm sorry,
they were MPs. They were MPs of the government of India. But much more needs to be done. I agree with you on that aspect. I do agree with you.
David wants to say something.
If I can just jump in as well. I mean, one kind of test case that I certainly understand and which you'll all be aware of is Hong Kong, which was British for a century. And look at the mistakes that Britain. You should learn from our mistakes. You know, we kind of handed back Hong Kong, which was nothing before us. We handed it back to China. And look at what's happened in a very short 1989 and in the last 20 years. I mean, it's on its way to being completely gobbled up, democracy removed from it by the Chinese. So, you know, these people are ruthless in what they do. So I agree, Francois, we should number one, I like to see, you know, all this pussyfooting about with Taiwan. We need to support and recognize Taiwan, and shame in the UN, by the way, for not doing so. Number one. Number two, Tibet's really interesting one. My knowledge isn't as good as your folks, but you folks. But I understand that, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the major rivers which feed into China flow through the Tibetan plateau. So my just a question is it not a strategic danger then to China if China basically no longer controls Tibet? Because theoretically that would mean that those rivers could become, that source of water could be compromised. Just a question, I don't know the answer.
No, absolutely. You know, very quickly, Francois answers, I'll just tell you something. There is something called the Special Frontier Force in India. You know, the Special Frontier Force is made, it's just 2-3 battalions. I think 4 battalions. They're made exclusively of Tibetan soldiers. They're called Vikas Force.
Yes.
They're meant for special operations. Now they're used, but they have to be used much more strategically and with strong diplomatic will. I think the problem really is on the diplomatic side. As Francois pointed out, there is a problem.
There is a weakness in the will.
There is a weakness in the diplomatic will. Yeah.
Very good. Very not understandable. I mean, it pains me that such a great country. I mean, you're right. The Indian soldiers have such great courage. Shown it again and again. I spent some time with the army in Kashmir. Great officers, great soldiers, but the leadership, you know, is not. You know, is letting down the soldiers. You know, again today, the leadership is letting down the soldiers. I'm sorry.
Sure.
No, there is a strategic thinking in the Indian political mind, and Francois brought that out very well earlier on. I think the Gandhian framework is still here.
The bureaucracy. It's not easy to approve the bureaucracy in such a large country.
And you know, we can leave the disagreements on the military side, whatever. But the crux of the matter is, whatever the military is, the military will not be able to use it if the mindset doesn't change. I mean, we wargaming this. Last 2-3 weeks, I've spent time wargaming this with other people, very, very well-known people. And every wargame, we've been able to defeat China if I'm able to use all my power, all my military levers in my power. But if suddenly, like what happened in 1962, if you're told you can't force, you know, that's the end of my strategy gone. So
same thing happened in Kargil initially. Can't use Air Force.
Yeah, again, Kargil we won, but it cost us. So I think the most important thing is the Indian leadership's mindset across has to be long-term strategic focused on a civilizational issue. You should also think about this. And I think Francois describes that, and he will be able to describe that better than me with all the aspects of it. Has to be focused on the civilizational issues, and there has to be a desire for it. But I don't know, maybe the Gandhian gene is too strong. I don't know what's happened.
This is, I would say, curse of democracy. Like in US, with every government, the policy changes. With UK, every government, the policy changes.
In the US, that's what its long-term interests are.
No, but the thing is, even in the US, some of the things that is happening right now, and I'm very much aware about what's going on, at least at a high level though, whatever is available in the media, though not privately. And US obviously a lot of things are infected with a socialist mindset, but that is for a different program. We'll discuss on that as well. Coming to the last question, so anyway, so out of time. So today, and Akshay, this is for you. Today, to deter any country, militarily, it is important to have military strength so that the enemy has fear. While what we saw on the night of Sin was definitely one of the things that kind of set the example. Very briefly, and we want to have follow program on military balance of India and China, very going deep, but just setting a precursor in this program. Can you tell our viewers, what do you see the military balance of India versus China?
Okay, very quickly. On the forces, we've got roughly, say, about 210 to 20,000 troops right across from down to Arunachal Pradesh. The troops are in situ, so lines of communication, short lines of communication means what are your supply lines? They are short. In Arunachal Pradesh, there's a little bit of problem of infrastructure that was brought out, that has been taken care of. China against this has about 175,000 troops in the Western theater against which India comes, but it takes care of Russia and Central Asia as well. So even if they use all of those troops, they just don't have enough to hit. In mountain warfare, you need superiority of 5:1 minimum. Usually, if you're taking a peak, maybe even 12:1 to win. Given the topography and given all of that, it is simply impossible for them to do so. Air Force, and we can talk about equipment later. There's an equipment aspect, but we are okay there. As far as Air Forces are concerned, they roughly have about 1,200 combat aircraft, 500 are obsolete, 100 or so obsolete, leaves them at 800. Interesting thing is they can't use them against India because they've got only 4 airfields in Tibet, and they've got 2 airfields in Xinjiang. The airfields in Tibet are roughly at anywhere between 3 to 5 meters, about 15,000. You can't really, you have severe restrictions in range, but if the hands are not tied, you can take professional decisions. We will achieve air dominance. As far as Navy is concerned, they have a numerical superiority, but everybody I've spoken to, and we've walked in this, they will not get the Navy into South China Sea. We will in fact be able to interdict their sea lines of communication. We will be able to stop them from getting oil into China. Again, it needs guts. So at the top, you have to take the risk that, okay, Navy, implement unrestricted warfare. Implement unrestricted warfare. If you implement unrestricted warfare, the Indian Navy is superior to them, despite the fact that numerically they're superior. And one of the main reasons for that is geography. There are 3-4 straits there that we can choke. But that is the broad military description.
Thank you. And we are having follow-on program viewers next Sunday on that. But coming to, so we can end the program now. Thank you so much, viewer.
Thank you.